from 209 naira per kilowatt per hour to 160 kilowatt per hour, effective August 1, 2025. Now, several state governments have now announced plans to actually tow a similar path. However, this sparked sharp resistance from GenCos and DISCOs, raising tough questions about who truly controls power pricing in Nigeria and whether we're headed for a gridlock or a breakthrough.
Recall that the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission disclosed that 7 states now control the electricity markets in accordance with the Electricity Act 2023 and expected to complete their transitions between now and September. This has now resulted in the tariff reductions we are beginning to see. On one hand, tariff cuts could be a lifeline for households battling inflation and erratic supply. However, on the other hand, experts warn that the politically motivated pricing might wreck the already fragile power infrastructure. Is this a populist stunt or another strategic reform? Joining us for today's discussion is Dr. Sam Amadi, former chairman and CEO, Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Reactions have trailed the tariff cuts by states trying to cushion economic hardship, a move that the DISCOs and GenCos are particularly not thrilled about. Some have called it a political move. But these states, that is, of course, Enugu, Ondo, Ekiti, Imo, Oyo, Edo, and Kogi, and other states, including Lagos, Ogun, Niger, and play to overstep their bounds by independently slashing electricity tariffs. Or is this a bold move towards decentralized regulation?
Well, typical of everything in Nigeria, a lot of noise, less signal or sense. Again, we always don't predict outcomes that seem to be, clear in the horizon. So when you allow states to create national electricity market, the clear implication is that you're going to have differences in tariff structure because tariffs are not enacted as law. Tariffs are outcomes of application of methodology to different and varying circumstances. So take, for example, Enugu State, okay? First, the NERC tariff was a result of formula and also policy, fiscal policy. The Band A paying more than Band B and C is not because it has to be so. NERC reflected the fact that the federal government devaluation policy and all that created, if you like, cost overall in terms of, inflated the costs of doing business, and NERC has to find a way. And NERC chose that maybe we can outsource more costs to those who we think can pay because they are theoretically going to have more power. So they say, okay, let's use Band A, B, C. Now, that's what it is. Now, Enugu starts setting their tariff and says, look, we accept the wholesale tariff. And let's understand it. The wholesale tariff is the generation cost, which is fixed by contract between NERC, bulk trader, and the generator. So Enugu didn't alter that. It's a given. They took it and say, this is the wholesale price. But the distribution company that serves Enugu is a company that has its own cost structure. So DISCO give us their cost structure. The DISCO gives them an envelope, say it's 18 billion, let's say 18 billion. And it was okay, typical of regulation, you do what we call prudence and relevance check to make sure those costs are efficiently procured. So what they do, they say, okay, break this cost down to us, just like New Central. Somebody says, give us your cost, your variable cost, you have a variable cost, you have a fixed cost. The cost of a New Central will be different from that of another station, depending on the context. So Enugu looks at that and say, well, fortunately for us, your real cost from what you have given us is not 18 billion, it's actually, let's say, 8 billion. Therefore, your tariff, which is what tariff? Tariff follows, there's no formulaic or standardized notion that a tariff must be X. Tariffs, to be cost efficient, must reflect the real cost plus interest or profit and return on investment. That's the broad formula. So if Enugu now says that the real cost you are giving us means that you are what we call revenue requirement, how much you need to serve Enugu is less than what you got when you were doing NERC, then Enugu will be right to say the real tariff should then be X. So the key question is, has Enugu done the work in allowing this prudent investor to recover all the cost plus allowable return on investment and other things? If they have done that and the price drops, then that's the right thing. Some states can see their own price go up because their cost is higher. I give an example. States like northern Nigeria, where there is radial transmission, distribution, long expanse of land, low density in terms of concentration, would obviously perhaps have a costly distribution network, in which case the tariff might vary. So this is the point here. Typical of Nigeria, the Ministry of Power in handing over these things and NERC to an extent did not do the kind of work I expect them to do, which is to provide more guidance, better guidance, and even help these states lead them hand to hand. So the risk we're going to run is that populism, like you said in your intro, some states, they don't have the level of methodical sophistication Enugu had. And interestingly, the people who did work in Enugu are my staff who work with me largely, and I'm aware of the background work they were doing. So you don't expect all the states to do what Enugu has done. So they might end up creating a bandwagon, and in doing that, they will hurt the sector. They will now bring very impossible to implement tariffs. I think that's a risk, and that should be something that, if I was a federal government, we would have a conversation and say, let's bring everybody together to think around how to make this, not become another pandemic, another political risk, and another disincentive for investment in the sector. So Enugu is right. Federal government is right to say, if you do this, then take over the subsidy. Well, yes, states should be fiscally responsible and manage their sector well.
I mean, on paper, you say they're right, Dr. Amadi, but we seem to have a conundrum now, because the GenCos and DISCOs are claiming that these cuts jeopardize their financial viability. What does that say about the structure of our power market? Is it built to serve citizens or protect monopolies? How do we get out of this fix?
Okay, so that's a good problem. We've always had it. When I was NERC chairman, and in 2015 or 2014-15, I was accused of using tariff to help PDP. I mean, some of these people who came to power, which was wrong. You see what I did then? When we did a tariff and it was too high, they're going to call rate shock. You can't do a tariff that you increase by 200, 300. In fact, in developed countries, a tariff of 50% increase is a rate shock. It's too high for somebody to absorb it. So we got an inquiry. I would say, you know what? There's what you call collection loss, which is money that DISCOs could not recover. And I said, it doesn't make sense for you to throw at us your own inefficiency. We need to zero it out, then you come and prove. When you prove, we'll give you. And the people carry propaganda, oh, blah, blah, blah. Now, that's what's going on here. This tariff structure we are applying in Nigeria is not efficient for the customers. So many of the DISCOs have smuggled in inefficiencies into their system. Some of them are posting costs that are not real if you conduct forensic review, which is what regulators should do. So you have a situation where the methodology may be more political or presumptive. We assume. We don't have clear data. You don't even know how much, for example, the DISCO says we are going to buy 2,000 transformers. And probably in the last year, they said so, and they only bought 550. If you don't have a good data analysis and capacity to find out, that means that they are having a windfall. They are making more money than they ought to make. Now, this is a regulated business. The first principle is that nobody should make more money than they ought to. So that's why it's called allowable revenue. Revenue is allowed because the revenue actually is a real cost plus your return on investment, your depreciation, and all those calculations. So the first problem is that everybody's talking about this is going to affect us. How? So if I was a minister, I would invite a meeting, open book. Okay, show us this methodology. Now, show us why this methodology does not, going to underserve you. This idea of cost-effective tariff is a motive language. So DISCOs use it as a sword and a shield. They protect themselves. They sometimes use it to not allow the regulator to find out what they're doing. So I want someone to tell me why Enugu is wrong. I mean, I've heard their commissioner, they have called me and said this is what they did, and if what they did is true, if they asked the DISCO to submit their real costs, and they submitted those real costs, and discovered that those costs are more than what they quoted, or less than what they quoted, and they use those real costs, proven costs, to give them a tariff that they require, then no harm. But if Enugu assume that there's a subsidy the federal government will pay, and therefore reduce their tariff to just make a political justification, that's wrong. So I think that this is a story around the need to have a much more transparent, much more reviewable methodology for pricing, so that people can sit back and look at that methodology and take a back of envelope calculation and see that, well, it makes sense. This allows for everything that it needs to allow. It allows for all the costs are there. Interest rates changes are indexed. Inflation is indexed. The return on investment is properly there. Everything is there. Cost of borrowing is there. If you provide for all these things, and the DISCO play their part, because the two parts here is, one, DISCOs are going to be efficient and not corrupt. If the DISCOs are doing back of envelope or under the table transactions, if they buy one transformer, they say they paid 50 million instead of 20 million, then they are breaking their own deal. The deal is you have to be efficient. You have to only make those costs that are necessary. You can't, for example, put your CEO on a 3-duplex and pay, for example, 3 million a year. The regulator would disallow it. That's not the proper, that's not, or you buy helicopters and private jets for management, the regulator will strike it out. That's not what consumers pay. So the science of it is that the regulator has to be sure that the costs you want to transfer to customers are the real cost and prudent cost for serving them, not bloated costs, not padded costs. And so this debate will require a regulator who is firm, who is market friendly, who will allow all the allowables but disallow the disallowables. And that's what we're not having that level of transparency and openness. And I think that's a way to reassure the market. What they are doing now will cause we call it a wrong. Investors all over the world will be saying, maybe their tariffs are politically fixed and it's not good for the market. I saw one of the newspapers report DISCOs kick against. I mean, that's not good for the market. So I think somehow there's need to restore stability and integrity in the discussion, so that if there's real problem that Enugu DISCO need to amend and other states need to do, then we have that sorted out, rather than create a sense in which the DISCOs will go to town chatting about how they're not able to get cost-effective tariff, and how political populism is conditioning or influencing tariff making, in which case investors all over the world will be wondering,
all right, Dr. Amadi,
is still a market to go to. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Amadi, let's look at the subsidy. We also are aware of the electricity subsidy. It's been a very serious conversation this past week. We're told it jumped about 220%. Almost 2 trillion naira, as it were.
So why am I paying?
Yeah,
why am I still paying so much?
The government is trying its best to subsidize electricity, and then you have conversations around, oh, the pricing should drop, it should increase, and so on. Where do we go with all of this? Doesn't it look like there seems to be some a form of disjoint conversations within the same sector, and it's like everyone is trying to move either way, while not everyone sits down and find out what the solution would look like. But then again, let's talk about the subsidy. 2 trillion, and we're looking at the percentage as well.
Well, you're right. I mean, look, the federal government, from a fiscal policy perspective, feels that the subsidy is overburdened. And again, lack of clarity. The regulator ought to come out clear. What are these subsidies? In the electricity market, I want to call cross-subsidy, which means one customer class, for example, the commercial class is paying more than residential. Elsewhere in the world, residential pay more than commercial. Why? Because government policy is to reduce cost of business and make their place competitive. So there's a cross-subsidy inherent, which means one class is subsidizing the other class. That's one. Two, The subsidy that arises because government does not want tariffs to go high, so government takes off a chunk of the cost is another subsidy. There's a third thing they call subsidy in Nigeria, which is that government wakes up one morning and devalues the currency and therefore makes their cost higher. And that difference constitutes a extra dip or revenue of operators, which therefore is now said as a subsidy. It's subsidy caused by fiscal policy. It doesn't mean that people are served better, no investment. No, the same investment, the financial cost of that investment has doubled or tripled because of government, fiscal policy or monetary policy. So that's also what they call subsidy. Then there's also what they call subsidy, which is under recovery, that a disco is supposed to recover 100 million from its customer. Due to corruption, connivance, foolishness, or lack of capability, it recovers only 70. They say, 30 million cannot be recovered, therefore cannot be paid. It goes back to debt, which they now call subsidy. So I think the subsidy, we need to clarify what is subsidy. Is when government or any other person is paying a part of what a customer ought to validly pay, then there's a classical subsidy. But where your system is inefficient and you can't recover what the regulator has already allowed you to recover, not because the regulator stopped you or government stopped you, but because you have corrupt officials, that's a loss, not a subsidy. So, okay, having clarified that, the subsidy element, we need to take it seriously, because if government is fiscally stressed and this government is not interested in investing in socioeconomic well-being, then there's a talk down around subsidy. But subsidy exists in all markets. Look at the European market. The EU spent billions of dollars subsidizing the energy because of the crisis in Ukraine and Russia. So subsidy in Nigeria has made to look like a very terrible thing. But let's not get into that political economy. The key point here is, if you're not going to subsidize any element of these services because of fiscal constraint or any reason or ideology, then you should allow the price to reflect the actual cost, because it's dangerous to create a notion of subsidy and not provide that subsidy, and therefore expose the operators to loss, and therefore expose the sector to constraint investment, and then the vicious circle of low supply, low payment, low confidence. So my view would be this: there should be clarity with the federal government and states. And again, if states take over their network, as they are doing now, then it doesn't make sense relying that federal government will subsidize. Except there's a deal, an MOU, that federal government commits to some element of subsidy, because this is a national economy. We have one economy. We have, under the constitutional framework, we have multiple 26 and one FCT states, if you like. But there's one economy. And therefore, the federal government, in my view, should maintain eminent domain to structure and launch and push the sector to work, because we don't want to move from a comatose or dilapidated or epileptic national electricity grid to a 36+1 dark patches across the country. And my fear is that if you don't get people who know in the room to help strengthen things, we might end up not just having one national grid that is failing, that is out most time, but we're going to have 37 grids that are not working, and that will be worse. So I agree that we need to have this conversation. We need to be clear about subsidy. Subsidy is dangerous if it's not well managed. So if you're not going to fund your subsidy schemes and fund them on time and fund them to the tune that you commit to, then it's better off to allow the price to go up. It can't do half and half. It can't say we have subsidy, but the subsidy is not forthcoming. So if there's going to be subsidy, federal government has to be clear. States also may have to put in some subsidy themselves if they can afford it. But looking at the structure of the states, many of the states, and that's my view,
all right,
that the rush to take states out is wrong. In few states, Lagos perhaps, Lagos obviously, Enugu has shown a technical capacity and political will. Some states, their governors cannot even have the procedure. They can't even have the discipline to structure anything. So why should they bail out on the national grid only to throw the people into confusion. It's going to be tough weeks and months.
Okay, I want to go back to something you said earlier, and that will be my final question about transparency. You talked about the role that the regulatory commissions have to play and that they have to ensure that there's some measure of transparency. What would that structure look like if we're to guarantee the transparency within these regulatory commissions, and who should be held, to uphold these transparency that you speak about?
Again, first, I think the regulatory commission, different style, have been shy of media engagement. When I was there, if I was the chairman, what would I have done first is that you're going to go through the country. Let the people know what this new transition means. I think there'll be no public education about what the transition means for everyone. Means for disco. People are hearing manpower. Which manpower? We used to know about Enugu disco. Not many people have heard about this transition and what it means. So there need to be a broad communication. Secondly, the NERC as well has to come out with clarity around what I call common services. Think about transmission. There's going to be common services. Think about the power plants are not state specific. They are power plants sending power to the grid. So they continue to send power to the same form. How do you ensure that main power, which is something of Enugu disco, that takes power that is going to Enugu and sell, will be able to send the money back through their main company called EEDC that will not send back to the market operator. So those transitional arrangements have to be clearly spelled out. Secondly, the issues around debt, subsidy, how much. So each state that's opting out has clarity as to what they share from the federal government in terms of losses, what they share from the federal government in terms of benefits, and how each of this process will happen. What happened really is that the euphoria, typical, it was politicized. Oh, we have got this game changer called Electricity Act, which every state. The minister and his team, they didn't quite sit down, and by now we should have a real roadmap, something you can open or click on the website that tells you, frequently asked question, what happens to X if X happens? Answer. What happens to, so operators, investors, the consumers, stakeholders, everybody will now be able to go and say, this is the way things have changed and will change. And this is how things will remain the same in spite of that change. And that's really what it is about leadership. So I think there was a massive failure of leadership in this period. And what the regulators can now do, I think first NERC has to clarify where they stand in all this, what is still NERC doing if this happens. How will NERC react, or whether NERC is out? What does it mean that say that a state has its own regulator? What's the intercourse between NERC, the handshake between NERC and that regulator? It should be very clear. The ministry has to come out clear and establish various policy implications of this in terms of physical, or how will government continue to invest in the electricity sector, how will government manage transmission, if transmission is going to also support various states. This kind of clarity, policy, regulatory, and transactional, even the TTCL, nobody knows how would TCL operate. I was invited to a conference and I was telling them that this is how they should do, and they were all shocked. Oh, this makes sense, this makes sense. So that tells you that nobody has sat back to reflect and dimension the various layers of what this means. And this is typical of Nigeria. We hate desktop work. People like either the contract part or to go around on television. But someone has to sit back and work on the desktop and produce all these documentations and processes, and then be able to go around on the road show and say, it's just like in the moment in 2005 when we started this reform. It needs massive communication. It needs road shows. It needs a sense of engagement with stakeholders, with operators, with investors, with the public, using the media. So I think that's really what needs to happen now. Because down the line, we're going to see more confusion if we don't start, showing confidence, clarity. Because you see, once there's clarity and people know that these issues are sorted out and this is what will happen, then you have less room for the kind of uproar we had a few days ago or yesterday about discourse threatening all kinds of things, and GenCos worried and states responding. That's evidence of lack of effective communication from the regulator, the policymaker, the ministry, and the stakeholders and operators in the market.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Amadi, for helping us get the sense of what the situation truly is from the electricity Nigerian sector, you could say, from a NERC and as well from the GenCos and the DISCOs as well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.